In Atlanta, a grounds manager hired a mapping company to scan the soil near the 5th green. The radar revealed 86 human bodies beneath the grass, all buried 6 feet deep and all facing east. There were no headstones, no names, no records identifying who they were. The golf course had been built in the 1930s on land that once belonged to the Fulton County Almshouse, a place where the poor were confined and labeled as inmates. Their crime was poverty, and Atlanta is not the exception. It is a pattern repeated across the country. I found 7 counties across America where the same thing happened, each one hiding something worse than the last, each one concealing bodies that were never meant to be found. But before I walk you through them, you need to understand the system that created those graves. From the 1820s through the 1950s, nearly every county in America operated what was known as a poor farm. Some called it the almshouse. Others called it the county home. The function, however, was identical everywhere. If you were poor, mentally ill, elderly, orphaned, disabled, or simply inconvenient, the county could send you to one of these places. You would live there. You would work there. And you would be classified not as a resident or a patient, but as an inmate. The federal census recorded these people with a single word in the occupation column: pauper. In 1880, the government even created a special census supplement with a title that reveals exactly how the country viewed its most vulnerable citizens. It was called Schedules of Defective, Dependent, and Delinquent Classes. But before poor farms existed, there was something even worse: public auctions. Across towns in New England, events called vendues were held where families who could not support themselves were put up for bid. The lowest bidder won the pauper's labor in exchange for food and shelter. In March of 1825, a single mother and her 4 children were auctioned in Manchester, New Hampshire. They were split into 5 different homes. At another recorded auction, an elderly black man was sold to a farmer for $11. A disabled girl was handed to a man the newspaper described as a hard-looking mountaineer for 60 cents per week. Social reformer Thomas Hazard wrote about this system in 1851, calling it offering a reward for the most cruel man that could be found to abuse the poor. Poor farms eventually replaced the auctions. They were supposed to be more humane. They were not. Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, is the first place I want to take you. The county poor farm there operated for more than a century. Its burial register ran from 1882 to 1974. 5 separate pauper cemeteries have been identified within the county, not 1, not 2, but 5. A 4th was discovered in 1991. A 5th surfaced in 2000 near the Menominee River. In 1878, the Milwaukee Sentinel ran an article titled "A Disgraceful Potter's Field," reporting that coffins were literally pushing up through the ground. Nobody fixed it. Then there is the gravedigger's testimony. A man who buried the dead at the Milwaukee Poor Farm left behind words that have stayed with me ever since I read them. He said, "Maybe it is just a newborn baby not wanted and so done away with by its own mother. Maybe it is some withered old man who shows too plainly even in death that he has been an acute alcoholic. No matter. They are all human beings." His assistant was a 71-year-old man named William Edwards. Edwards was himself an inmate of the infirmary. He lived in a shack near the burial field, and his job was to keep at least a dozen graves, adult and infant, dug in advance, ready and waiting for people who had not died yet. Find a Grave currently lists more than 7,500 memorials for that cemetery, and the site notes that this number represents only a small fraction of the total names in the burial book. Montgomery County, Maryland, takes the story even deeper. Their poor farm was established in 1789. An 1877 inspection described basement rooms for African American inmates as overcrowded, dirty, and offensive. A 1913 report found the buildings overrun with vermin, with children sleeping on the kitchen floor. But the detail that stopped me cold was this: 2 of the 3 known lynching victims in Montgomery County, John Diggs Dorsey in 1880 and Sidney Randolph in 1896, were reportedly buried in unmarked graves at the poor farm. Murdered by mobs, then disposed of alongside paupers. No markers. No acknowledgement. In 1981, when developers converted the former farm into the Oaks landfill, they discovered even more unmarked graves. These remains were believed to be people the former property owners had enslaved. The Smithsonian attempted to identify them and failed. In 1987, National Park Service archaeologists relocated 60 to 70 additional graves. Even now, the Maryland State Highway Administration has proposed widening Interstate 270 directly through the former poor farm grounds, and officials are still trying to determine where all the bodies are. Now back to Fulton County, Georgia, Chastain Park, that golf course. In 1911, Fulton County opened 2 almshouses on West Utica Road, segregated by race. The White Almshouse is now the Galloway School, a private institution listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The African American Almshouse is now the Chastain Art Center. Children attend classes in one building. Artists display work in the other. Neither advertises what the sites used to be. When the grounds manager hired Len Strozier of Omega Mapping Services to conduct the radar survey in 2014, Strozier located 86 graves near the 5th green. He noted that the bodies were arranged in 2 distinct groups, separated by a gap that had once been a road dividing the burial sites by race. The white graves were placed on the eastern side. The surveyor explained this was done so they would be closer to the front of the line when Jesus returned in the eastern sky. Segregated in life. Segregated in death. Segregated in the resurrection they were promised but never saw. Only one person buried there has ever been identified, a 70-year-old man named L.H. Evans, who died in 1922. Everyone else remains unknown. Monroe County, New York, Rochester. This is the case that made me sit with the research for 3 days before I could write about it. Highland Park in Rochester is famous for its Lilac Festival. Thousands of visitors walk through the gardens every spring. What almost none of them know is that the park was built on the grounds of the Monroe County Almshouse, Insane Asylum, and Penitentiary. Inmates from all 3 institutions were buried together in unmarked graves on the property. No cemetery records existed. The burial location was completely lost. Then, in 1984, a bulldozer performing routine landscaping uncovered 6 skeletons. A rainstorm exposed 6 more. Archaeologist Brian Nagel and his team were called in. Over the course of that summer, they excavated 305 bodies. The remains were studied at the Rochester Museum and Science Center and at the University at Buffalo before being reinterred at Mount Hope Cemetery. One skeleton was tentatively matched to records for a man named Adoniram Perkins, an unmarried laborer who died at age 45. His cause of death was listed as leg amputation. The skeleton showed both legs amputated below the knee with no bone healing, confirming he died on the operating table. He went into surgery and never came out. His body was placed in an unmarked grave. An estimated 600 additional bodies remain beneath Highland Park to this day. Every May, visitors walk through the lilacs directly above them. Philadelphia County, Pennsylvania, reveals the machinery behind all of this. Poor farms were not just warehouses, they were supply chains. The Philadelphia Almshouse, known as Blockley, maintained one of the largest potter's fields in the nation. Today, it lies beneath Franklin Field, the University of Pennsylvania's football stadium. Penn's medical school purchased cadavers taken from the Blockley grounds for its dissecting tables. In 1845, administrators themselves acknowledged that body snatching caused dread and anxiety among the inmates. The almshouse developed a terrifying reputation among the city's black population. As one account recorded, many believed that if they entered that hospital, they should not expect to come back alive. Only as a last resort did they seek admission. Then, in 1882, a massive body-snatching ring was exposed at Lebanon Cemetery, an African-American burial ground in South Philadelphia. Hundreds of bodies had been stolen and sold to medical schools. In response, Pennsylvania passed its 1883 Anatomy Act, making it legal for medical schools to claim unclaimed bodies from almshouses. Read that again. The solution to illegal grave robbing was to legalize it, but only for the poor. The Anatomy Acts spread across the country. The poor knew what was happening to their dead. And they lost. Middlesex County, Massachusetts, Tewksbury. This is the worst one. In February of 1876, a 10-year-old girl named Anne Sullivan was delivered to the Tewksbury State Almshouse with her younger brother, Jimmy. She was partially blind from a bacterial infection called trachoma. He had tuberculosis. Within 4 months, Jimmy was dead. Sullivan spent 4 years inside Tewksbury. She later described it as indecent, cruel, melancholy, and gruesome. In 1880, during an inspection visit, she threw herself in front of state official Franklin Sanborn and begged him to let her go to school. He did. She transferred to the Perkins School for the Blind and eventually became Helen Keller's teacher. That is the version of Anne Sullivan most people know. Here is the version they left out. In 1883, Massachusetts Governor Benjamin Butler accused Tewksbury management of trafficking in the bodies of dead paupers and transporting them for profit to medical schools. He also alleged that human flesh was being tanned to make shoes and other objects. A Harvard Medical School graduate, Dr. John Dixwell, testified before the investigation committee that he personally witnessed several hundred infant bodies brought to the school for dissection each year. According to his testimony, the bodies were obtained from a man named Andrews for $3 to $5 apiece. Andrews told him they came from the Tewksbury Almshouse. Some of the dissected infants showed signs of death by starvation. The governor charged that between 150 and 250 infant corpses were sold to medical institutions every single year. A former inmate, Eva Bowen, testified that she believed a doctor at the facility had killed her newborn son with morphine. A night watchman named Charles Dudley testified that the superintendent once told him, aside from a building being on fire, do not notice too much. That sentence compresses the entire philosophy of the American poorhouse into 9 words. Do not notice too much. And now, Cook County, Illinois, Dunning. The scale of this one defies language. In 1854, Cook County opened a poor farm on 520 acres northwest of Chicago. It expanded to include an insane asylum, an infirmary, and a tuberculosis hospital. At its peak, roughly 1,000 people were buried on the grounds every year. Over 70 years, the estimated total reached 38,000 burials, all in unmarked graves. The cells in the original buildings measured 7 by 8 feet, with barred windows and iron doors. They were unheated in winter except for a stove in the hallway that failed to raise temperatures above freezing. The beds, walls, and floors were described as alive with vermin. In 1897, a watchman named Henry Ulrich was convicted of selling corpses from Dunning to a medical professor in Missouri. The professor testified that Ulrich even offered to kill a patient and sell the body. Ulrich allegedly claimed the man was housed in the killer ward and that staff would simply assume he had wandered off. Then, in 1989, a backhoe operator building condominiums on the former Dunning grounds struck a corpse. Archaeologist David Keene was called to the site. He described the area as littered with human remains, bones scattered across the soil. During construction of Wright College on the same grounds in the early 1990s, a researcher reported that femurs would surface from the dirt. He said you could walk into almost any yard in the area, dig into the flower beds, and come up with human remains. Today, the former Dunning grounds include a Jewel grocery store, a shopping center, a college campus, houses, and condominiums. In 2018, a $70 million Chicago public school was approved for construction on the same land. Workers were required to take special precautions to avoid disturbing the dead. Of the 38,000 people buried there, only about 8,000 have ever been identified by name. The rest remain anonymous, still beneath parking lots, produce aisles, and college classrooms. And here is the detail that ties all 7 counties together. In 1935, the Social Security Act was passed. Benefits were sent directly to individuals. But the law specifically excluded anyone living in a government-provided facility such as a county home, almshouse, or poor farm. If you lived in one of these institutions, you received nothing. Counties faced a choice: keep operating the poor farms and receive no federal funding, or close them and allow residents to collect Social Security. Denton County, Texas, closed its poor farm in 1949 for exactly this reason. In 1990, the County Historical Commission reported that the cemetery on the property had been destroyed by property owners who built over the graveyard. The poor farm system did not end because America became more compassionate. It ended because it became cheaper to write checks. And the moment the institutions closed, the graves were bulldozed. I need to be honest about something. I have covered institutional erasure on this channel before: asylums, orphan trains, missing records. But this topic almost broke the format for me. Not because the evidence was hard to find. It is shockingly easy to find. Census records list these people by name. Newspaper archives describe the conditions. What troubled me was the math. Every county had one of these places. Thousands of counties. More than 130 years. The number of people who lived in this system, died in it, and were buried without a marker is staggering. It is not in the thousands. It is not in the tens of thousands. It is a number so large that no one has ever seriously tried to calculate it, because calculating it would force a conversation that American institutional history has largely avoided. If your family tree hits a dead end in the 1800s, if an ancestor vanishes between one census and the next, consider this: there is a real possibility they ended up in one of these places. The 1880 federal census recorded poorhouse residents by name, age, and condition. Those records are searchable right now. Your ancestor might be in them. And if they died in one of these institutions, they are likely in an unmarked grave beneath something ordinary: a park, a highway, a school, a grocery store. Their name recorded once, then forgotten for 150 years. So ask the question: how many more bodies lie beneath how many more construction sites? How many counties paved over their poor farm cemeteries without a single archaeological survey? And the question beneath all the others: when a country decides that certain people do not deserve to be remembered, what does that reveal about the country that followed? The radar keeps finding what it was never supposed to look for. And every time someone breaks ground in a county that once operated a poor farm, there is a chance they will uncover something no one accounted for, not because the bodies were hidden, but because no one ever believed they were worth finding.